Elena seized the opportunity to check his phone. Her hands trembled as she unlocked it. She'd seen the passcode enough times to memorize it. The messages confirmed her worst fears. David, can't wait to see you tonight. Sophia, me too. I miss you already. Elena perched at the edge of the bed, staring at the clock on the wall. The minutes stretched into an hour, then 2, and still, her husband David hadn't come home. The dinner she prepared sat untouched on the dining table, the candles long since burned out. This wasn't the first time. Over the past few months, David had become a stranger in their marriage. He'd once been the man who called her just to say he missed her voice, who planned spontaneous weekend getaways, and who couldn't wait to share every detail of his day. Now, he was distant, a ghost of the man she'd married. When the door finally creaked open, Elena braced herself. David walked in, his tie loosened and his shirt wrinkled. "Sorry, work ran late," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. Again, Elena's voice was calm, but the tension was unmistakable. David sighed, brushing past her. "We're closing a big deal. It's just how things are right now." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that the late nights and vague explanations were simply part of his demanding job. But a gnawing feeling in her gut told her otherwise. Chapter 2. The Maid. The next morning, Elena found herself in the kitchen, watching Sophia polish the countertops with meticulous precision. Sophia was young, with dark, wavy hair that always seemed perfectly styled, even as she scrubbed and cleaned. She had an air of confidence that was hard to ignore. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," Sophia said with a polite smile. "Good morning, Sophia," Elena replied, forcing a smile. Elena had hired Sophia a few months ago to help with household chores. At the time, she'd thought it was a blessing, an extra pair of hands to manage the demands of their busy home. But now, she couldn't help noticing how often David lingered in the kitchen when Sophia was there, or how Sophia's laughter seemed a little too loud when David cracked a joke. "Let me know if there's anything else you need," Sophia said, her voice warm and professional. Elena nodded, but her mind raced. Was she imagining things? Was she being paranoid? Chapter 3. Fragments of Truth. Later that week, Elena was folding laundry in the bedroom when she heard voices drifting up from the living room. She paused, her hands freezing mid-fold. David's voice was low and measured. "We'll talk about it later. Are you sure?" Sophia's voice was soft but insistent. Elena's heart pounded. She tiptoed to the door and cracked it open, straining to hear more. "I said later," David snapped, his tone sharper than usual. The sound of footsteps followed, and Elena quickly retreated into the bedroom, her mind swirling with questions. What were they talking about? And why was David speaking to Sophia like that? Chapter 4. Doubts and Denial. Elena confided in her best friend, Carla, during a coffee outing the next day. "I feel like I'm losing my mind," Elena admitted, stirring her latte absently. "David's been distant, and I think something's going on between him and Sophia." Carla leaned forward, her expression serious. "Have you talked to him about it?" Elena shook her head. "I don't want to accuse him without proof." "What if I'm wrong?" Carla placed a comforting hand on hers. "You're not crazy for feeling this way, Elena. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is." Elena nodded, though doubts still gnawed at her. She resolved to watch more closely, to gather the evidence she needed before confronting David. Part 1. Suspicions Arise continued. Chapter 5. The Turning Point. Elena's suspicions reached a breaking point one Friday evening. David had texted her late in the afternoon, claiming he'd be stuck at the office for a late meeting. Yet when she called his desk phone to confirm, no one answered. Her chest tightened as a mix of worry and dread flooded her senses. She glanced at the kitchen, where Sophia was wiping down the stovetop. Something in the maid's demeanor felt different. Her movements slower, her expression almost smug. "Are you heading out for the night, Mrs. Carter?" Sophia asked casually, not looking up from her work. Elena forced a smile. "No, just waiting for David to get home." "Oh," Sophia said, her tone light but unreadable. "He's working late again, right?" Elena's grip on the counter tightened. "Yes. How did you know?" Sophia froze for a split second, then resumed her cleaning. He mentioned it this morning. Elena nodded slowly, though her mind was spinning. She didn't remember David saying anything about a late night to Sophia or to her. Chapter 6. The Breadcrumbs. The next morning, while David was showering, Elena seized the opportunity to check his phone. Her hands trembled as she unlocked it. She'd seen the passcode enough times to memorize it. The messages confirmed her worst fears. David, can't wait to see you tonight. Sophia, me too. I miss you already. Her breath caught as she scrolled through weeks of exchanges, flirty emojis, late-night rendezvous, and even photos. Each message was a dagger to her heart, the weight of betrayal crushing her chest. The sound of the shower turning off jolted her into action. She quickly locked the phone and placed it back where she'd found it, her mind racing. What now? Did she confront him? Confront Sophia? Her world was crumbling around her, but one thing was clear. She needed answers. Part 2. The Discovery. Chapter 7. The Confrontation. Elena decided to confront them both. She waited until the following evening when she knew David would be home and Sophia would still be working. Her anger simmered beneath the surface, barely contained as she watched them move about the house, pretending nothing was wrong. Sophia, Elena said, her voice icy as she stepped into the kitchen. Can you come into the living room? David, you too? They exchanged quick glances, but neither objected. Elena stood tall, her arms crossed as she faced them both. I want to talk about what's been going on between you two. David stiffened. What are you talking about? Sophia's face flushed, her eyes darting toward the door. Don't play dumb, Elena snapped. I've seen the messages. I know everything. The room fell silent. David's shoulders slumped, his face a mask of guilt. Sophia looked down, unable to meet Elena's gaze. How long? Elena demanded, her voice breaking. How long has this been going on? David finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. A few months? Elena's world shattered in that moment. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. The confrontation escalated into a heated argument. David tried to justify his actions, claiming he felt neglected and unappreciated. Neglected? Elena shot back, her voice trembling with rage. I've been raising our son, managing this house, supporting your career, and this is how you repay me? I didn't mean for it to happen, David said, his voice pleading. It got out of hand. Sophia, meanwhile, stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Carter. I didn't. Save it, Elena cut her off. You work in my house. You've eaten at my table. And this is how you repay me? Sophia fled the room, leaving Elena and David alone. Elena stared at him, her chest heaving. I don't even know who you are anymore. Chapter 9. The Breaking Point. Elena spent the night in the guest room, unable to face David. Her mind raced with questions. Should she leave? Could she forgive him? What would this mean for their son? The next morning, she packed a small bag and called Carla. I need to get out of here, she said, her voice breaking. Can I stay with you for a while? Carla didn't hesitate. Of course. Come over whenever you're ready. Elena left without a word to David. She needed time to think, to process what had happened. But one thing was certain. Her marriage would never be the same. Part 3. The Fallout. Chapter 10. The Escape. Elena arrived at Carla's house with red-rimmed eyes and a heart weighed down by betrayal. The familiar warmth of her best friend's embrace brought a brief, bittersweet relief, but the pain of what she'd left behind gnawed at her. You did the right thing, Carla said firmly as she set down a steaming cup of tea. You needed space to figure out what you want. What I want, Elena said bitterly, is to wake up and find out this was all just a bad dream. But it wasn't. It was real. And the life she had spent years building now felt like a house of cards. As Carla listened, Elena poured out everything. David's excuses, Sophia's tears, and the crushing realization that trust was a fragile thing, easily shattered. What are you going to do? Carla asked gently. Elena shook her head. I don't know. I just know I can't go back there. Not yet. Chapter 11. David's Plea. David's calls started that evening, one after another, until Elena finally turned off her phone. She wasn't ready to hear his apologies or excuses, and she certainly wasn't ready to discuss what would happen next. The next morning, Carla handed her a second cup of coffee and sighed. "He's not going to stop, you know." Elena nodded, staring at the phone in her hand. Part of her wanted to hear him grovel, to make him feel the weight of her pain. But another part of her didn't want to give him the satisfaction of a response. She finally picked up when he called again that afternoon, her voice icy and controlled. "What do you want, David?" "I want to talk," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "Please, Elena, just hear me out. Talk," she snapped. "Like you talked to Sophia behind my back?" "I don't think so." "Elena, I made a mistake," he said, desperation creeping into his tone. "I know I hurt you, and I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Just come home. Let's talk face to face." Her laugh was hollow. "You think one conversation is going to fix this? You've broken everything, David. I don't even know where to start." "Then let me help you figure it out," he pleaded. But Elena wasn't ready to forgive, and she certainly wasn't ready to go back to the house where the betrayal had happened. Chapter 12. Facing the Family. 2 days later, Elena sat down with her teenage son, Jacob, who had started to pick up on the tension. "Mom, where's Dad?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Elena took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. "Your dad and I are going through something right now. We need some time apart." Jacob's eyes widened. "Are you getting divorced?" "I don't know," Elena admitted. "But I want you to know that none of this is your fault. We both love you very much." "Did he cheat?" Jacob asked bluntly. Elena's stomach twisted. "Why would you ask that?" "Because he's been acting weird," Jacob said. "He's always on his phone, and he's been coming home late. I figured something was going on." Elena sighed, tears threatening to spill. "It's complicated, honey, but I promise we'll figure it out." Jacob nodded slowly, but his face betrayed the confusion and hurt he was feeling. Chapter 13. Sophia's Exit. Elena returned to the house briefly a week later to gather more of her things. She made sure David wasn't home, but Sophia was there, her face pale and drawn. "Mrs. Carter," Sophia said hesitantly. "Can I talk to you?" Elena's eyes narrowed. "I don't think we have anything to discuss." "Please," Sophia said, her voice trembling. "I just want to apologize." Elena crossed her arms, her expression cold. "Go on then." "I never meant for this to happen," Sophia began. "David, you came to me first. I should have said no, but you didn't," Elena finished sharply. Sophia nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm leaving. I've already packed my things. I just wanted you to know how sorry I am." Elena didn't reply. She turned and walked away, her head held high. Sophia's apology didn't change anything. Chapter 14. Rebuilding. Over the next few weeks, Elena began to focus on herself. She threw herself into her work, reconnected with old friends, and even joined a yoga class that Carla had recommended. But the nights were the hardest. Alone in Carla's guest room, the silence was deafening, and her thoughts ran wild. Memories of happier times with David played in her mind, but so did the image of him with Sophia. The betrayal she couldn't forget. One evening, Carla walked in with a glass of wine and a knowing smile. "You need a distraction," she said. "Let's go out. Dinner, maybe even some dancing." Elena hesitated but finally agreed. As the night went on, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Chapter 15. A Final Confrontation. After a month of separation, David showed up at Carla's house unannounced. Elena opened the door, surprised and wary. "We need to talk," he said, his expression earnest. She let him in, but kept her distance, arms crossed. "Say what you need to say, David." "I know I messed up," he began. "I betrayed your trust, and I hurt you. But I want to make this right. I'm willing to go to counseling, to do whatever it takes to earn back your trust." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained firm. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Do you even understand what you've done to me? To our family?" "I do," he said, his voice breaking. "And I hate myself for it. But I love you, Elena. I don't want to lose you." She shook her head, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "Love isn't enough, David. It's not just about you anymore. I have to decide what's best for me." Chapter 16. The Choice. Elena sat alone in Carla's quiet living room, a steaming cup of tea cradled in her hands. David's words from their earlier conversation echoed in her mind. "I don't want to lose you." She had spent weeks grappling with the weight of his betrayal, vacillating between anger, heartbreak, and the tiniest flicker of hope that they might find a way to heal. But tonight, sitting in the stillness, she realized something important. It wasn't just about David's feelings or whether he deserved a second chance. It was about what she wanted, what she needed to move forward. The door creaked open, and Carla walked in, her expression tentative. "How are you holding up?" Elena gave a weak smile. Still deciding, Carla sat beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Whatever you choose, just make sure it's what's best for you. Not for him. Not for anyone else. You deserve that much." Elena nodded, Carla's words resonating deeply. Chapter 17, The Ultimatum. 2 days later, Elena asked David to meet her at the house. She wanted to speak in a neutral space, not Carla's sanctuary, not a public place where emotions might spill out uncontrollably. David was already waiting in the living room when she arrived. His face lit up when he saw her, but he quickly masked his optimism, sensing the seriousness in her expression. "Thank you for meeting me," he said cautiously. Elena sat across from him, her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. "I've had a lot of time to think," she began. "And?" David asked, leaning forward. "And I've come to a decision," she continued, her voice steady but firm. "If we're going to have any chance of rebuilding this marriage, things need to change drastically." David nodded eagerly. "Anything. I'll do anything, Elena." "You'll quit your job," she said bluntly. David blinked in surprise. "Quit my job? Why?" "Because it's part of the problem," Elena replied. "The late nights, the secrecy, the excuses, it all stems from your work. If we're going to rebuild trust, you need to prioritize this family. And that means leaving the environment that allowed this to happen." David hesitated, the weight of her demand sinking in. I can't just walk away from my career." "Then you're walking away from me," Elena said coldly. The room fell silent, the ultimatum hanging heavy between them. Chapter 18, A New Reality. David left that evening without giving Elena an answer, but the look on his face told her all she needed to know. Over the next week, she began taking steps to secure her independence. She consulted a divorce attorney, started researching job opportunities to re-enter the workforce, and even began looking for a new place to live. It was terrifying, but it was also empowering. For the first time in years, Elena felt like she was in control of her own life. Meanwhile, David tried to salvage their relationship with half-hearted gestures. A bouquet of flowers, tearful phone calls, vague promises to figure things out. But none of it addressed the root of the problem. Elena saw through his efforts. She realized that while he regretted getting caught, he hadn't truly understood the depth of her pain or the effort it would take to rebuild what he'd destroyed. Chapter 19, Sophia's Letter. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail, handwritten and unmarked. Inside was a note from Sophia. "Dear Mrs. Carter, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say this. I've left town and I don't plan on coming back. I made a terrible mistake, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. You didn't deserve what happened, and neither did your family. I'm writing this because I want you to know that I take full responsibility for my actions. David made his choices, but I wasn't innocent. I hope someday you find peace. Sophia." Elena stared at the letter for a long time, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and reluctant closure. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave her a sliver of finality. Sophia was gone, and so was the chapter she represented. Chapter 20, A Fresh Start. Months later, Elena stood in the doorway of her new apartment, sunlight streaming through the windows. The space was smaller than the house she'd shared with David, but it felt lighter, freer. Jacob helped her unpack, his mood brighter than it had been in weeks. "This place isn't so bad," he said, grinning as he arranged books on a shelf. Elena smiled, ruffling his hair. "It's a new beginning for both of us." David had ultimately refused to leave his job, and their divorce was finalized quietly. He tried to fight for custody, but Jacob had made it clear he wanted to stay with his mom. Elena didn't regret her decision. She had found strength in herself she hadn't known existed, and she was determined to build a life filled with honesty, joy, and independence. Epilogue: Rediscovering herself. A year later, Elena sat in a bustling cafe, sipping coffee as she reviewed a manuscript for the small publishing company she'd started working for. She felt a tap on her shoulder and turned to see Carla smiling at her. "How's the new job?" Carla asked, sitting down beside her. "Busy, but I love it," Elena replied, her face lighting up. "And how's life?" Carla asked, her tone teasing. Elena laughed. "Peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I feel free." Carla raised her cup in a mock toast. "Here's to freedom." As Elena clinked her mug against Carla's, she felt a sense of contentment she hadn't felt in years. Her past might have been filled with heartbreak, but her future was hers to shape, and she was ready for it.